Good afternoon. So we are about to begin a new session on this academic day. For this session, we have a panel organized by the Institute of International Studies of the University of Chile and the Diplomatic Academy of Chile. The title of this panel is Middle-Income Countries and the Holistic Action Agenda for Financing for Development, Challenges and Opportunities. Let me begin by introducing the moderator, a highly respected figure within the UN system and someone deeply familiar with the financing for development process. He served as the lead negotiator of the Monterrey Consensus and has actively participated in the Monterrey, in the Doha, and in the Addis Financing for Development conferences. In addition, he brings extensive experience with the inner working of the UN, having served as Chile Deputy Permanent Representative to the UN. Dear Eduardo, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. You can put the press the bottom. No, the white one. There. No, at your right. There.
Okay. Thank you for your word. And welcome to this panel dialogue to support the upcoming fourth Financing for Development Conference negotiations. This panel, as I was said, is organized by the Diplomatic Academy of Chile and the Institute of International Studies of the University of Chile. But let me tell you, before we begin our session and present the panel, I would like to give the floor to Ambassador Paula Narváez, Permanent Representative of Chile, to say a few words as an introduction to this event. Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. It is both a pleasure and an honor to address this audience today at this pivotal dialogue on middle-income countries and the holistic action agenda for financing for development challenges and opportunities at FfD4. Allow me to begin by expressing my deepest appreciation to the Institute of International Studies at the Universidad de Chile and the Diplomatic Academy of Chile for convening this vital conversation with a distinguished panel of esteemed speakers from Colombia, Mexico, and Chile joining us today. We meet at a moment of critical reflection for the international community. The world is grappling with intersecting crises that threaten progress toward achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Climate change, growing inequality, rising debt vulnerabilities, and the uneven recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic have underscored the urgent need for a financing system that is resilient, inclusive, and transformative. It is within this context that the contributions of middle-income countries must be amplified and understood. Middle-income countries are a cornerstone of global development. Representing over 70% of the world's population, they are home to diverse economies, vibrant innovation hubs, and immense potential for fostering inclusive growth. Yes, the realities are complex and often misunderstood. Mix among which we can find Chile and other countries of Latin America sit at the intersection of unique opportunities and structural challenges. Despite contributing significantly to global economic activity, we face persistent vulnerabilities, including limited access to concessional financing, heightened exposure to external shocks, and barriers to implementing long-term development strategies. This paradox highlights a pressing gap in the current financing for development framework. We must work collectively to establish a global system that recognizes and supports the needs of all countries. The upcoming fourth International Conference on Financing for Development in 2025 must become a defining moment for advancing these objectives and shaping a financing framework that leaves no one behind. We must approach it with ambition and pragmatism, ensuring that our solutions are tailored to the realities of all developing countries, including middle-income countries, while addressing the systemic challenges that affect us all. In closing, let us use this platform to catalyze change. Financing for development is not simply a technical or economic issue. It is a moral imperative, one that lies at the heart of achieving a sustainable and equitable world. As we engage in today's discussions, let us remember that we are not just addressing challenges, we are building solutions, crafting partnerships, and setting the course for a better future. Together, we can transform the promise of sustainable development into a shared reality for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And dear friends, a few words as presentation of the panel. In this panel, we would like to address the key strategic challenges and opportunities that middle-income countries, as an important constituency of the Global South, are facing in the global economy for financing their development, including in its national, international, and systemic dimensions. As developing countries pursue their own development, it is crucial to respect and enhance their regional and national policy space, and their development efforts need to be supported by an enabling international economic environment. Our discussion will also emphasize the critical role that middle-income countries can play as contributors to addressing systemic economic dysfunctions worldwide, and their potential in opening innovative new pathways toward equitable and sustainable development and shared prosperity, especially in the context of the ongoing technological revolution. To address the substantive agenda, we have four excellent speakers. Professor José Antonio Ocampo is professor at Columbia University and president of the International Commission of Experts for FfD4, former executive secretary of ECLEC, CEPAL, we remember that, and he is a former Under-Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs in our time, and also former Minister of Finance of Colombia. We have also Dorotea Lopez, Director of the Institute of International Study of the University of Chile. Mr. José Manuel Campos, who is there, he is Head of Trade Agreement Division at the Vice Ministry of International Economic Relations and at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Chile. And Ambassador Mauricio Escanero from Mexico, former facilitator of the Monterrey Consensus, I say Monterrey, Mexico, not United States, and the first international conference on finance for development. I am Eduardo Galvez, I've been already presented, currently working at the Diplomatic Academy of Chile, former Chilean DPR at the UN, and former ambassador to the World Trade Organization. To start, I would like to give the floor to Professor José Antonio Ocampo for his presentation on strengthening global financial and tax cooperation.
Well, let me thanks for the invitation to be in this panel. Ambassadors on my both sides. Let me say that Chile is a country that I love very much, actually for my 6 years as head of CEPAL. So it's, in a sense, I always consider it like my second country in Latin America. I'm also very glad actually to be with Mauricio Escanero in this panel. With Mauricio, we actually, I mean, he was let's say the leader in the preparation of the Monterrey Consensus, or the Monterrey Conference that led to the Monterrey Consensus, which was the first Financing for Development Conference. It was a great success. Actually, as I learned later, I was then the head of CEPAL, so I participated in Monterrey as the head of CEPAL. But later on here, on the secretary, we have to implement the Monterrey Consensus. And it was a very good opportunity, actually, for the United Nations to work together with the World Bank and the IMF. That was a big breakthrough, actually, in that regard. And and the annual reports that we started to produce on financing for development together with the World Bank and the IMF. So that was a big breakthrough. I say the other conferences have been good. I was also in Addis Abeba, which was also an excellent, and actually we're taking as a background for the work of the group of experts, they say the Addis Abeba agenda, actually with a few more topics that I will mention, but of this very, very comprehensive. Let me start by saying, in the case of development financing, of course, the needs that we have are great, or the middle income countries. But let me emphasize in particular the issue of climate change financing, for which, I mean, the needs are significantly higher than the available financing. And actually, the COP, the Conference of the Parties that just ended, the 29th Conference of the Party, gave very little additional resources on climate change. So the possibility of using the development banks in particular for that purpose is essential, including the possibility of supporting private sector investment, because one of the big advances in renewable energy is actually the financing of private projects in solar panels and wind. Actually, Chile is one of the leaders in Latin America by far in this regard, and there's a possibility of supporting that either with financing but also with guarantees. They need to expand the guarantee funds. The best one is the World Bank Guarantee Fund, for which can be used by private investors, but that can be done by many other banks. And I mean, one of the advantages that we have in Latin America is that we have the largest network of multilateral development banks. Because aside from the World Bank, we have the Inter-American Development Bank, we have CAF, the Development Bank of Latin America, we have the Central American Integration Bank, and you can say maybe include the Caribbean Development Bank. The network that Latin America and the Caribbean has in Development Bank is the best of the world. So that's a good opportunity to use those institutions. The CAF in particular is a very active bank now, and CAF, very funny, it just kept the old acronym, Corporación Andina de Fomento, but it went from being Andean to being Latin American and Caribbean now. So it's a very important bank, and it has a great possibility. So the using of those institutions, including to support private investment with financing or guarantees, is actually the first thing that I wanted to mention. The ambassador mentioned the issue of financial shocks, which is, of course, an issue for the monetary system. Now, in that regard, let me say that one of the basic problems that that middle-income countries have is that the access to financing, to private financing, is procyclical. So in good times, we have lots of financing with small risk margins, but in times of crisis, like we had in 2022, 2023, there is little financing at high risk margins. So that procyclical financing in the bond markets is a very important cost and has to be managed somehow. And there are two mechanisms that are important. One, which actually has been proposed by Liliana Rojas Suarez, which we're going to include in our reports of the recommendations. It was presented in the previous panel here, which is to allow the IMF to intervene in the bond markets for emerging and developing countries during times of crisis. The same as let's say the Fed has done with the U.S. bond markets, and the same as the European Central Bank has done. So to allow the IMF to intervene so as to smooth the the effects of the shocks, the negative shocks that are very strong for middle and emerging and middle-income countries, including for Latin America. So so that's one mechanism. And the other is, of course, aside from IMF financing, we also have a regional institution, FLAR, the Latin American Reserve Fund, which is a very good institution. I think it's the best institution, a regional institution in developing countries. I'm happy that Chile rejoined. Rejoined FLAR, which was a very important point, as well as CAF, actually, when somehow during the Pinochet period, it left the two Andean institutions and rejoined recently, both of them, which is a very important. Anyway, the Latin American Reserve Fund, for example, has been a very active institution also, providing financing for member countries in a significant amount. During many crises, actually, FLAR has given more financing to the countries than the IMF. This is a topic that I have done research on. So it's actually very, very important, and particularly to the smaller members. For example, Ecuador has been a country that has had significant financing from FLAR through the different crises and has been very productive. So that's the second point that I wanted to underscore. Now, the issue of tax cooperation is also a very important topic, and of course the major process in this regard is actually the convention that is going to be negotiated in the UN. The terms of reference have already been approved twice, actually. So it's a major step forward, and I hope we have a common position of the Latin American countries and the developing world in general in those negotiations. So I am very positive in that regard. And actually, we also have a regional mechanism of cooperation, which is actually Colombia, Chile, Brazil, the three countries that are managing it. And it has like 9 or 10 members now. And it's also a very positive process, also to have common views, but also to have mechanisms of cooperation. Now, I guess I will not emphasize debt crisis because that's not although we do have a few countries of debt crisis, and there is an area which a lot of action has to be done. But let me actually finish with some issues of financial regulation that we are introducing in the group of experts. It's a new topic, let's say, from the point of view of the financing for development process, because it was not part of any of the previous agendas. And we are particularly obsessed with two topics I want to mention, which are very, very important for our countries. The first one is crypto assets, on which there is no regulation worldwide. And from experience in several countries, including my own Colombia, some of those crypto assets, they're sometimes called cryptocurrencies, but really not currencies. But the crypto assets are used for illegal transactions. Narco-trafficking uses those assets in a very active way. And so the regulation of them, and also there is no protection for the person or firm that invests in crypto assets. Like in financial regulation, you have to protect the depositors, the buyers of assets. But in the crypto world, there is no whatever. So this is a topic that we want to include in the recommendations as something that has to be done at the global level. And the other is the derivative markets of commodities. Which is also a topic very important for commodity exporters like Chile or Colombia or most South American countries, and which the experience is that the benefits when periods of volatility, the benefits for the large intermediaries in commodity markets, which are usually large firms from developed countries, takes a lot of the benefits from the. So there has to be a bit more regulation of those markets in order to avoid the benefits from those particularly from price booms to be captured exclusively by those firms rather than by the countries that produce the commodities, which is a topic that we saw very clearly in 2022 and 2023. Anyway, with those comments, I guess I'll finish. But let me perhaps finish by emphasizing that one of the recommendations is the importance of regional institutions. I think Latin America is the example of strong regional institutions in many of the financing areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ocampo, for this very substantive proposal. Now I will give the floor to Professora Dorotea Lopez. This is the floor for a presentation on inclusive trade, including mainstreaming the gender perspective in trade and development policies and the transition to greener economies without resorting to protectionism. Dorotea?
Thanks, Ambassador Galvez. Thanks for presenting the panel together with the International Studies Institute. Thanks to the Ambassador. It's a pleasure to be with Professor Ocampo, with Ambassador Scanero, and with Jose Manuel Ocampo. When we presented the panel, we were reading the UNCTAD third documents, and I would like to invite you to Santiago de Chile, April 1972, during the opening of UNCTAD 3. The former U.S. Secretary of Defense and then the President of the World Bank, Robert McNamara, surprised the audience by underlying the challenges of combining social equity with economic growth. He also raised the looming debt problem and the need to promote trade as an element of development. Revisiting UNCTAD 3 today allows us to make a reflection that more than 50 years after its closure is still relevant today. The discussion in various multilateral forums seem to continue to maintain the concerns of developing countries: inequality, poverty, protectionism, and the lack of technology transfer. Also, the origin of today's conference, the Monterrey Consensus, where the ambassadors were the albatros, both the albatros here, brings us the questions that I would like to highlight today. Considering the phase of trade work and the tariff loop with what protectionism can mean, it is more necessary than ever to think about a new multilateralism for development. But above all, to answer the question of what can we do to rekindle the enthusiasm and commitment of the actors. How can we achieve another Bretton Woods with the same creativity, but one that takes on board the new problems? Development with environmental and inclusion issues, where education is a pillar. Because we all know a new order depends on the legitimacy that societies grant to their rules and norms. For this, I think being the academy here together with the policymakers is really important in order to try to find a prosperous balance between free international trade, a necessary condition for development, and a flexibility for states to adapt according to their conditions and objectives to this trade. I would like to bring to the table 3 issues on which there is research and recommendations worth highlighting for this order. The first one is inclusive trade. Even since the academic Cynthia Enlow asked where women and in international affairs and UNCTAD, Secretary General Rebecca Greenspan state the vision of economic development that have exclude the gender dimension, things have been changing but really slow. Today, at least, we have the consensus that trade policies often have gender differentiated impacts and that women face unique obstacles and opportunities. This conclusion could be extended to other marginalized groups. We have to move to a new era of the rules of the game in trade and investment. We must persist in the much needed reform of the WTO, debated at length, and which will inescapably have to include a new agreement for a gender perspective in trade. We must raise marginalized groups to use digital tools and benefit technological advances in trade, to include them in financing and export support schemes, mainly supporting women-led small and medium enterprises. Fundamental, again, is to engage civil society organizations that focus on gender equality to inform trade policy. Collect and use sex disaggregated data to measure the impact on trade and finance on women and design target interventions. So I think we can say to that we have a number of proposals that allow us to rethink the new rules in a different world. The second point that is key for development, and I want to refer, and I really believe on it, is education. Education in all the aspects that the education means: research, teaching, training, something that was discussed today in the opening session with very interesting conclusions. Because we have enough literature showing that countries with higher average of schooling years tend to have higher per capita income, and that education builds capacities to react and recover for economic crisis, for rapid labor market. Education is essential to reduce informality. I mean, I can't be speaking about the advantages of the education all the time, but that's not the point. But the point is that we must promote equal access and economic opportunities for disadvantaged groups, such as people with disabilities, young people living in rural communities, etc. Because a new order is not the only work of governments or state policies, it is the work of us and requires acceptance and respect for regional and national and local differences, which are really embedded in a good education. Finally, Professor Ocampo mentioned, but I just want to mention that green productive transition is fundamental, because we have to move to a shift towards renewable energies, sustainable production, and environmental friendly technologies. However, to drive this shift without resorting to protectionism, middle-income countries need to coordinate their efforts in areas such as the development of green taxonomies. Multilateral cooperation and standards are essential for a green transition. However, this cannot be done in a way that widens the gap between developed and developing countries. A new multilateral agreement to boost active financing of the transition in developing countries is mandatory, as was already mentioned. If we want a stable order for ourselves and future generations, we need changes. We cannot talk about sustainability without climate justice, nor development without gender equality. The path to a more sustainable future is inclusive by design and equitable in its implementation. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank to all the panelists.
Thank you, Dorothea. Thank you for your work. And mainstreaming gender perspective in all activities of finance for development. This is our, policy from here. Now I will give the floor to Jose Manuel Campos. The floor is going to be for presentation on plurilateral agreement at the WTO and financing for development. Jose Manuel.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. First of all, I would like to express my sincere thanks for inviting me to present on the relation between the multilateral trading system and the plurilateral trade agreements, and of course have the opportunity to share this panel with such a distinguished speakers. This is an issue that I have researched academically first in the University of Chile, actually with Professor Dorothea Lopez, but also there is an issue that I have faced professionally as I've been working closely with WTO issues during my career. So today, I will address the present challenges facing the multilateral trading system, specifically on the need to adapt its rule to the evolving global landscape. International trade, as you know, serves as a vital engine for economic growth and development, connecting us to global marketplace of goods and services. Now more than ever, trade plays a crucial role in addressing critical issues such as raising living standards for our population, creating more and better jobs, mitigating climate change, fostering innovation, and harnessing the potential of emerging technologies like artificial intelligence in the digital age. So the multilateral trading system, with the World Trade Organization at its core, has evolved significantly since its creation in 1994. We now account a total of 166 members. While the WTO, a member-driven organization, has successfully negotiated important agreements since its establishment, such as the Trade Facilitation Agreement and the harmful fisheries subsidies, the consensus-based decision-making process, where basically means that no member object to a particular decision, has increasingly hindered progress on new trade rules, particularly in a more fragmented world. To address this challenge, the fact is that members have turned to plurilateral agreements, both within the WTO and outside the WTO. Within the WTO, a subset of members has negotiated agreement on domestic regulation of trading services, investment facilitation for development, and e-commerce. These agreements, while not universally binding, pave the way for innovative trade rules. In addition, members are continuing plurilateral discussion under the WTO on issues such as trade and sustainability, fossil fuels, MSMEs, women empowerment, among others. On the other side, outside the WTO, plurilateral and mega regional trade agreements such as the CPTPP, RCEP, or ASEAN have emerged among like-minded countries as alternative platform for countries to deepen economic integration and set a higher set standards. This complex interaction between multilateral and plurilateral approaches reflect the evolving landscape of global trade, as it was during the GATT period during 1947 and 1995, which then constitute the basis of the WTO agreement. Therefore, as the world becomes increasingly interconnected, countries are seeking flexible and innovative ways to shape the rules of international trade. The rising protectionism, coupled with a harsh international environment, threaten to undermine the rules-based multilateral trading system. The benefits of globalization are increasingly questioned, while new trade wars and unilateral measures risk disrupting supply chain and global value chain. Developing countries, particularly vulnerable to such disruption, must unite and reinforce their commitment to the international rules-based system. It is time both not to lose what we have achieved up to date and do better in those areas where international rules are lagging behind with respect to what we are experiencing today. To safeguard the gains achieved thus far and address emerging challenges, we must also reinforce the role of trade in promoting sustainable development and inclusivity. By facilitating the spread of green technologies and empowering MSMEs and women entrepreneurs, trade can further contribute, among others, to economic growth, job creation, and poverty reduction. Governments and policymakers must implement measures to ensure that the benefits of trade are shared equitably, particularly among the most vulnerable groups. By actively promoting trade and its positive impact on people's life, we will be better prepared to counter protectionism and strengthen the multilateral trading system. In light of these challenges, two primary courses of action are essential from an international trade perspective. First, we must persistently defend the rules-based international trading system. Developing countries must unite to mitigate the impact of our more adverse economic environment and safeguard the principles of free and fair trade. Second, we must revitalize the multilateral trading system by exploring innovative approaches to the decision-making. A subset of WTO members should be empowered to advance under the WTO architecture their shared interest and negotiate new rules that address existing challenges, ensuring openness, transparency, and non-discrimination. So in conclusion, faced with an increasingly complex and fragmented international landscape, it is imperative for developing countries to join forces in defending the multilateral trading system by strengthening our cooperation and promoting innovative approaches within the WTO to speed up the decision-making. We can not only preserve the benefit of trade, but also adapt to the challenges of the 21st century. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jose Manuel. See, we are coming from WTO, huh? It's clear. We're trying to support. But now I will leave the floor to my friend and Ambassador Mauricio Scanero. I give you the floor for your presentation on the topic, a vision towards the fourth Finance for Development Conference. Please, Mauricio.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here again at the FfD process with a very distinguished group of friends of Monterrey at the podium and in the audience. I thank the organizers for inviting me to be here, and I thank all of you for your kind attendance. I will be having this conversation in my personal capacity as former facilitator of the Monterrey Consensus, the core nucleus of the Financing for Development process. I will start by recalling that Monterrey was an innovative multilateral and multi-stakeholder process which value added was to put into full play the legitimacy and convening power of the United Nations to provide the all-inclusive consensus-building table that we need to effectively address and act upon the holistic agenda for financing for development globally. Two main factors made the call for Monterrey urgent and shape its substantive proposal. Firstly, from the systemic perspective, the negative social impacts of the late 90s international financial crisis highlighted the need to lead globalization and interdependence with equity and fairness. And secondly, arising from the series of UN conferences of the 90s, Monterrey came about as a much-needed cross-cutting platform to address the financing for the implementation of the emerging global development agenda, today epitomized by the Sustainable Development Goals. On both accounts, a policy shift was needed. That is why Monterrey came to be, proposing its holistic agenda to address the interconnected national, international, and systemic dimensions of financing for development and promoting the convergence of efforts of all relevant stakeholders at all levels. At its core, Monterrey was a call for an improved global economic governance for inclusive and sustainable development. Notably, Monterrey was not only innovative in its substantive proposal, but also in its democratic forms of consultation, negotiation, and consensus building, which included the coordination among the ministries of finance, foreign affairs, development cooperation, and trade at the national level, and the participation of the Bretton Woods institutions, the WTO, and other international organizations, as well as the private sector and the civil society. In doing so, the FfD process also projected itself as an organizational blueprint or roadmap for advancing towards an improved global economic governance. Today, the challenges and opportunities that gave birth to Monterrey continue to exist, but with a significant difference. Now the stakes are higher. So here is where taking forward the spirit of Monterrey can be of help if we manage to do it at a scale fit for purpose, taking full advantage of the unique strengths historically built into the FfD process. The next steps will be extremely challenging, especially in the current state of multilateralism and in the midst of delicate geopolitical tensions and military confrontations, which deeply complicate any cooperative scenario, including at the G20 and at the UN itself. How can we leverage our process to encourage constructive efforts at this historical juncture? I believe that above all, we should ensure that Sevilla serves to relaunch our FfD process as a global leadership undertaking to once again put into full play the legitimacy and convening power of the United Nations to galvanize political will and to foster multi-actor cooperation on our holistic agenda. Our FfD process should remain a beacon of multilateralism. To advance in this path, we must patiently cultivate shared understandings based on 4 fundamental principles of global governance. First, the principle of responsible sovereignty, defined as sovereignty that is exercised with respect to the sovereignty of other nations and in full convergence with the requirements of solidarity and collective action to confront global challenges. Second, the principle of national subsidiarity, which entails not only the respect of national policy spaces, but also the reinforcement of national capacities to implement international agreements. Third, the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and capabilities. And fourth, the principle of equity in international decision-making and norm-setting. With these principles as our compass, building upon Monterrey, Doha, and Addis Abeba, as well as the UN Summit of the Future and the recent G20 Summit, at Sevilla, our FfD Global Partnership should continue articulating agreed lead actions and collective initiatives that could serve as strategic spearheads of reinforced international and multi-actor cooperation, each time with higher ambition. The recommendations being discussed at the FfD academic dialogues today, the proposals put forward at the multi-stakeholders hearings 1 month ago, as well as the elements paper just released by the co-facilitators of the FfD4 outcome document, should help us to identify the most transformative actions and initiatives to pursue. I also trust that both the Group of Friends of Monterrey, led by Mexico, with the support of Germany and Switzerland, as well as the FfD International Commission of Experts under the distinguished leadership of Jose Antonio Campo, here on the podium, will prove to be helpful contributors. The recent initiative of the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty may be strengthened with the support of the UN as well. As we move forward, we must make sure that all our actions and initiatives reinforce each other. So national efforts to mobilize public and private resources to secure the well-being of our peoples and our planet, especially poverty relief, food security, healthcare, quality education, decent work, and environmental sustainability, should be fully supported by an enabling international economic environment, including by 1, international investments and technology transfers of mutual benefit, leveraged with blended finance and robust multilateral development banking. 2, by trade opportunities for development, especially in support of small and medium enterprises. 3, by advancing towards an improved global sovereign debt architecture that is fully aligned with the Sustainable Development Agenda. And 4, by enhanced transfer of resources, including by innovative financing mechanisms, such as the one proposed by the new president of my country, Mexico, for the allocation of 1% of global military expenditures to fund the largest reforestation program in history. As for the systemic level, we should aim to advance in two main pathways. Firstly, broadening the participation of developing countries in global decision-making and norm setting, including through a more inclusive global economic governance architecture. And secondly, enhancing the coherence and consistency of the international monetary, financial, and trading systems in support of development, including by, one, further capitalizing and aligning the Bretton Woods institutions and the multilateral development banks to better support financial crisis prevention and response, sustainable development, and global public goods provision. Two, by deepening international tax cooperation based on universality, fairness, and progressiveness, synergizing current OECD, G20, and UN efforts in this regard. Three, by ensuring that the technological revolution contributes to shared global development, including through the articulation of a suitable technology global governance. And four, as a cross-cutting priority, by mainstreaming the gender perspective into all development policies. All in all, we must ensure that our actions and initiatives keep coalescing into a global deal for equitable and sustainable development with clear priority undertakings or missions for collective action. As a whole, our process should contribute to add coherence, inclusiveness, and legitimacy to all convergent financing for development efforts by all actors. Today, at our historical juncture, as humanity, we require international cooperation and multilateralism more than ever. Sevilla should be an opportunity to consolidate our FfD process as a bridge building and consensus building multilateral platform to stay engaged in the spirit of Monterrey in the collective pursuit of an improved global economic governance for shared development and prosperity for all to the best of our potentialities. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Mauricio. Let me say, many years ago when we were a delegate here, so 20 years younger, he was representing Mexico, I was representing Chile. I was representing Chile, but the G77 and China. I always say this is G77 and China and Mexico, while they were not part of the 77, but it was because, in fact, we were always talking to each other what to push forward. The second thing I came to my mind with your good intervention is, let me say, I would like to remember Inge Kaul. She was one of the people perhaps they were not aware. But I was G77, but she was always saying some ideas to me in my ears, you know, Eduardo, this way, there's other way. And she was a fantastic friend of the process, and I just want to remember her. And I will say also, Stephen Griffin-Jones was, I think, in Sussex University. So I was really representing the 77, but receiving a lot of input, some people who really were experts, because we are diplomats, not experts. So it was a very interesting moment, and I remember that it's not only Chile and Mexico, but also the Latin American and the, I will say, Southeast Asian countries. Because there was this crisis, you remember, I don't know why people call it the Asian crisis, but anyway, they were, you know, the Malaysian delegate and others. So it was the middle-income countries were very strong on this, on this. And also, just last thing I would like to remember is that I'm so happy that there is here so many good friends of those time. I can see Barry Herman, I can see Daniel Titelman, and others who were always, you see, supporting our, of course, they were in the secretariat or the new school, etc. And Daniel is from ECLAC. So you can imagine that we, get a lot of support to push these things forward. And now, before I open the floor for questions and perhaps some comments, I will say, what are the priorities, the leading action that we would like to spearhead for our agenda? I think after listening everyone. First, I will say strengthening global cooperation regarding development financing. And I'm thinking really in your word, increasing the volume and quality of support by multilateral development banks, and exploring appropriate innovative sources for financing sustainable development. So innovative finance is coming again as a very important element. Second, I think just listening to you is that we should advancing towards an improved and more inclusive global economic governance architecture. This has been said by many of you, including, of course, the participation, improving of developing countries in norm setting and decision-making in international economic and financial institutions. This is given for us. How that is important thing, that we will listen to experts that can tell us how we can do that. Third, I think it was mentioned that we shall address the institutional gap in sovereign debt restructuring and international tax cooperation. I will not go to the details. You have already said what can be done. Fourth, and this also I have in mind, Jose Antonio, is consolidating the regional and national policy space required, for enhancing, a mutually beneficial investment and technology transfer. As you can understand, coming from Latin America, the regional aspect is always very strong. And I will say that also we would like to revitalize the international trade as engine for shared development with the WTO at the center of the multilateral trading system, strengthening its development dimensions. Sixth, I think we would like to foster the green transition while preventing protectionism. So I'm taking what Dorothea has said. Securing that the global technological transformation contribute to shared global sustainable development, I think you mentioned. And of course, it's mainstreaming the gender perspective in all policies related to financing for development. This is more or less what was also mentioned by Mauricio, but you mentioned in particular. Well, we don't have, I will open now for questions, comments, perhaps also some few words from, we don't have enough time, but we have at least, I think, for at least 2 or 3 sharp and precise questions, and the panelists can comment on that. So I will open the floor. I understand, but I don't know if it is here, that Her Excellency Jeetu Joshi, the Department of Economic Affairs of Government of India, wanted the floor. So if you can say where you are, so you can give it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. At the outset, let me thank the Permanent Mission of Chile for organizing this event and all the speakers for their valuable insight on this pertinent topic. The resilience of global economy today is being tested in the face of multiple headwinds that are amplifying the challenge of maintaining global financial stability while achieving inclusive growth. The international financial architecture faces heightened risks from geopolitical situations, rising living costs, interest rate fluctuations, and climate-related uncertainties. These challenges are exacerbated by the spillover effects of monetary policies in advanced economies, contributing to financial instability in many EMDs and middle-income countries. To address these challenges, comprehensive approach is necessary, focusing on improving global economic governance, promoting macroeconomic stability, and strengthening regulatory frameworks. India advocates for an inclusive and effective international tax framework, providing fair allocation of taxing rights, and we look forward to constructive discussions on the UN Framework Convention on Tax Cooperation. On crypto assets, we acknowledge that crypto assets present both opportunities and risks, particularly for EMDs. And while blockchain technology can enhance financial inclusion, increase transparency, and reduce transaction costs, the decentralized and borderless nature of crypto assets poses significant challenges to regulatory frameworks in developing countries. Therefore, We also support having comprehensive regulatory frameworks in place for crypto assets. Coherence and coordination across fora are particularly important in areas such as monetary policy as well. Implementing the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision recommendations tailored to country-specific circumstances can support financial stability. In addition, we recognize there are several risks and opportunities arising from technological advancements and climate change that need to be addressed through the implementation of financial regulations. Integrating climate risks into financial regulations will be critical in mitigating environmental impacts on economic stability. We agree that trade contributes to sustainable development, and we support strengthening the multilateral trading system with WTO at its core. We share many of the views shared by the panelists today, and we look forward to a fruitful preparatory committee meeting of the FfD4 starting tomorrow, and are ready to engage constructively on action-oriented proposals. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Her Excellency Hiketu Joshi. I understand you are the head of the Indian delegation for this negotiation, so we very much welcome your views. On these views, I don't know if Jose Antonio, you would like to have the floor?
Well, let me perhaps, I take into account all the comments made by the delegate of India, but let me perhaps point out in the issue of regulation, aside from crypto assets, which is a point that I already made, we are going to, the group of experts is going to recommend that climate change should be explicitly introduced in financial regulation, so that the risk associated to lending that may be damaging for the environment should be one of the criteria for financial regulation. By the way, several countries already have provisions of that sort, so it would be a generalization. And by the way, although not introducing that, we are also going to recommend changes which have to be with WTO, I guess, on intellectual property rights. Essentially recommended that the climate technologies should not have a specific protection, but should be freely available to anyone who wants to use them.
Thank you. There is another question? Please.
First of all, I would like to thank you for organizing this event for the academia. I am from Costa Rica. One problem that some income countries faces is that while fiscal adjustment and reforms are aimed to ensure macroeconomic stability, they often overlook the social and environmental needs. In this regard, I would like to ask to the panelists if the time has come for the World Bank to reconsider the per capita income ranking system and your thoughts on having a new multidimensional metric that take into consideration the 3 dimensions of the SDGs: economic growth, social inclusion, and environmental protection. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other questions, so we can take it? Okay, Bart.
Okay, thank you. Eduardo, I couldn't help but rise to the occasion since you mentioned me. Just make a comment about what Mauricio said about consensus building, and I'm a bit concerned about the fact that there's only 6 months between now and Sevilla. I'm very impressed. The other people here don't know the capacity of both Mauricio and Eduardo to seduce critics, to make them come along with ideas they didn't know that they actually supported, but he convinced them that they did. But I think what we're going to need now is a number of sort of parallel processes where interested governments and institutions and civil society and private sector representatives can kind of hash out particular proposals and decide maybe there's something here and that we ought to, in Sevilla, agree to do something serious on them. So since I also have a proposal I shared with you on a crypto transactions tax, which is basically actually, I figured out because India already does it. And it raises a certain amount of funds, but it would be much more effective if it were global, or at least larger than just one country. And it's something that sounds so crazy, and we know in my current government's, or no, coming government's administration, this is going to be, it's going to be very pro-crypto. But I think if it's like marijuana, make it legal and tax it. It could be of some interest, but that's just one idea about innovative financing. And I would hope that there would be lots of other options and then ways of continuing the conversation between now and Sevilla, and in more than just the formal, official preparatory committee meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. And a third question before we come back to the, no, but I have.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the panelists. My name is Ruud van der Helm from the MFA, the Netherlands. Just one thing to underscore and one question or concern I've got. The thing to underscore is really the gender mainstreaming. Now it's often a woman who speaks to that subject, but I'm happy it was echoed by the other panelists as well. And let me underscore the necessity of it. It's always mentioned somewhere in the preamble of the documents we sign, and then it's never operationalized. So there's a lot of work to be done, and it goes beyond gender disaggregated data, and it goes beyond the representation in boards. It goes these are issues that are important, but indeed we need to move ahead. Two things to mention here, and I hope that we can add value through the FfD4 process, is the economic empowerment of women, and this kind of moves indeed throughout the entire FfD, or the Addis Ababa Action Agenda as it stands today. But there's work to be done, and we know that especially the potential of women in emerging economies is very high, but it's very high in any economy. So, and we know that there's pressures, unfortunately, not only on the UN system, but also on the position of women worldwide. So this is something to work for. And one particular issue to add to the agenda is the financial inclusion agenda, which is also still very important for women working often in the informal sector, and financial health that is added to that. So not only have a bank account, but also be able to kind of manage the money and to avoid running into unnecessary debt at the individual level. So those are issues to raise. And one question I've got, because I came to this session because I'm very keen to understand indeed what the position is of middle-income countries as compared to the G77, of which you're part to a large extent. You're also part of OECD, at least the panelists at the table representing not really their country, but coming from those countries. So it's important to understand, But in particular, and that's my concern, is that what I see is that in the advanced economies, this agenda is seen as a development agenda. So we see a divide between ministries of foreign affairs or development cooperation, if you will, and the ministries of finance. And I listened very carefully to the panelists who ran the Monterey consensus, and you mentioned in particular the ministers of finance. So I was wondering whether, especially the countries represented at the table who are also in the OECD, how we can make sure that this issue is not a development issue per se, but really an issue that runs throughout the agenda and brings on board ministries of finance in the process. Thank you.
Thank you. I understand there is another question before I go to the panelists. Yeah, there. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you? Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for all the insightful contributions of the panel. And I have a very brief and question to Jose Antonio Campo, who mentioned the distinguished financial architecture, so to say, in Latin America, and especially the FLAR. Since in the Elements paper we have a mentioning of the need, especially for middle-income countries, to broaden their access to crisis finance, and you mentioned that too, I'd be interested on your perspective on what is the one crucial element that FLAR, that makes the FLAR fund distinct and sustainably rolling, existing, and providing crisis finance that should be and could be replicated to other regions and or, bodies with access for middle-income countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will go now to around to all the. If we can start with you. No. ¿Tú?
Mauricio.
Mauricio.
Professor Ocampo, you were the most.
Mauricio.
Thank you. Well, I take this opportunity, first of all, to echo what you said, Eduardo, about the tribute to our beloved, the late Inge Kaul, who indeed was one of the intellectual mentors or advisors that we had during the process. She was always educating us about the importance of global public goods provision. Interestingly, at the Monterrey consensus at the last session, the session in which we gave the consensus, the last paragraph to fall from the table was one related to global public goods. But with the years, now it's more clear that we need to take that concept very much into mind. And the other thing that I remember when you mentioned Inge Kaul is that she was always focusing on the principles of global economic governance. And indeed, the first time I heard one of the principles that I recall, responsible sovereignty, as I defined it, it was from Inge. So thank you for reminding us about her. Let's say that this is a tribute to her. I would like to refer quickly to the idea of the donors, recipients, the idea if this is a development cooperation or if it has a more broader agenda, the Monterrey process. And I will say, I try to refer to that in my initial remarks, but Monterrey precisely came as an alternative paradigm. Before Monterrey, the basic discussion here in these halls was about ODA. It was 99% of the conversation was ODA, donors, recipients. But Monterrey came after the international financial crisis of 1997-98, among other things. And it was clear that the impacts on development of the crisis was too severe to forget about it. It was basic. We realized that we had to address many other issues: trade, debt, investment, and the systemic issues. So ODA became one chapter, part of one chapter of the 6 chapters that originally built the agenda of Monterrey. And what we tried was precisely to promote the idea of a holistic agenda that addresses the interconnected national, international, and systemic issues to be able to be effective in supporting development, to align the international, financial, monetary, trading systems in support of development. That was the main concept. And because of that holistic agenda came the second element of Monterrey, that is the convergence of efforts of all the actors, IMF, World Bank, WTO, private sector, civil society, everybody in the table. What was the role of the UN? Providing the table, using the legitimacy, the convening power, the democratic forms that are the culture of the UN to allow for this multi-stakeholder, multilateral dialogue. And the important element of all this was to make it through consensus. So Monterrey essentially was a proposal to build bridges within actors and topics, consensus building among all to act together in a global agenda. And another important thing was that addressing all these issues also, as another dimension, was to help the financing of the implementation of the global development agenda. But was not only that. There were 2 sources of Monterrey. So that is the proposal, and I think that that is what we need to do now in Sevilla, to relaunch this as a global leadership undertaking, to put again back the UN in the position to support these efforts.
Thank you, Mauricio. You can see, in some way, finance for development, we always see it as supporting the United Nations. That was, we say, that is their place. It doesn't mean that we have a problem with the G20, another important group, but we always say the United Nations, here is where we are, everyone is here. And we need to try to get together and have an agreement in some basic things. And I just to finish you, let me say, and now I'm going to take like a Chilean. When we went to Monterrey, was President Lago, he went the Minister of Finance, with the Minister of Foreign Relations and the President of the World Bank, of the Central Bank. So we always understood that it was not only the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And I think that is the way. It doesn't mean they have any problem with ODA. So we were very clear with our colleague from Africa and others who needed that. We say, that is fine, and we will support you. But you should support us in trade issues. You should support us in the ideas we have in not transforming, but modernizing, the global financial system, etc. So I hope that the new delegate, we are not delegate now, will also go that way. Don't take this kind of only ODA, but ODA is important. Innovative finance is important, I will say. Just remember this. But anyway, it's just to say that that is the spirit of what we have in mind. And you must remember that we went to London, we went to Berlin, invited by different people, just to try to say, look, this is not only about ODA, but ODA is there, but also it's about debt, trade, finance, the global economic governance, and how you handle, do we need a new Bretton Woods institution? I'm not sure, but someone mentioned it, but you are the guy who knows really about this.
I think we're out of time.
Let me, actually, I mean, one of the great advantages of the crisis of 97-98 is that it brought financing into the United Nations. I think it was, as I said, my own experience having to implement the Monterrey Consensus here in the United Nations was actually, again, the capacity to have a dialogue with the Bretton Woods institution a very close dialogue with the Bretton Woods Institute. So I think that was a significant advance, and they participated quite actively, actually, in Monterrey. Both the World Bank and the IMF. And let me say that, of course, finance ministers. Many of the issues that we have talked about, go one by one, but are issues of the finance ministries in different countries. The issue of development, for development banks, the issue, environmental financing, environmental sustainability, although in that case with the ministers of environment, the international monetary cooperation with the central banks. You can go one by one, but of course finance ministers are at the center of the financing agenda. So I think this issue of development cooperation, as understood as ODA, and in the charge of, is a very particular issue, and I must say very OECD oriented. But there are many, many more issues that we're talking about in the different conferences. Let me actually also perhaps refer to the question of FLAR. FLAR is a very efficient institution. It has, of course, different lines of credit. There has a liquidity line that has to be approved only by the president of FLAR, which doesn't require a board meeting. But it has also the more regular financing facilities similar to those of the IMF. But also, for example, one for countries that are doing debt restructuring, so that they have liquidity during the debt restructuring process. Anyway, it's a very, very, and one very important issue: no conditionality. There is no conditionality in any of the credit lines of FLAR, and I think it has not lost a single cent, which is a very important topic for a financial institution. Anyway, I think I could speak about many more things, but let me finish.
Thank you. I think we're just in the last few minutes, but if anything you want to add before I
May I just add very quickly one thing that I think is important. Monterrey was also very much looking into action, implementation. And we had to recognize that it was not only a good document, there were many actions coming from Monterrey. One of them was that ODA, that was on the decline on those years, moved up again. So even for ODA, was a push forward. For many other areas, it was very important. Also at the AMF, it helped to promote some reforms, and at the World Bank for opening the space for developing countries. So many different institutions and actors find something in Monterrey. The name of the game in Monterrey was collective ownership, and we were looking for synergies among others. It's a challenge to link all the ministries at our national level. We have to do it, but I just want to underline this point. It was not excluding, just the opposite. By adding all the different elements of the equation of the holistic agenda, we reinforce each other. And that is what we have to try to do, to make sure that each effort helps to the same purpose, what is equitable and sustainable development. That is what we want for everybody.
Thank you. Okay, now, thank you. I know that we have not answered all the questions, but we know that some new panelists coming. So in closing, I also would like to highlight that our more ambitious objective will not be achieved in a single undertaking, but rather through a complex and challenging multilateral processes, step by step. And to this purpose, as our friend Mauricio mentioned, we must keep trying. At Sevilla, we should relaunch the FfD process, you said, as a global leadership undertaking to once again put into full play the legitimacy and convening power of the United Nations in the service of shared development, making sure that our bridge building and all-inclusive consensus building process remain a stronghold of multilateralism in the challenging year ahead. I think our time is up. Thank you once again to all of you for your kind participation and today. Thank you.